Quebec, today, the CAQ, the provincial government, tabled a draft constitution that Premier Legault says will protect Quebecers' core values. Johanne Poirier is a McGill law professor and expert in federal and constitutional law. We spoke early this afternoon, and I asked her what she thought of what she's seen so far as this draft constitution.
It's a big and not such a big bill. The constitution itself is only 13 pages long, including the explanation. So the text itself is quite short, but it also includes two other bills. So that makes it a little bit more complicated, one on the autonomy of Quebec and one on the creation of a constitutional council. So we can talk about that later. So in a sense, it's not that dense. But it refers to it includes two other bills, and of course it incorporates also other statutes, in particularly the Charter of Rights, the Quebec Charter of Rights, and Bill 101 and its following. So there are multiple pieces to it, yes.
The government is saying, so this is done, and I'm quoting, says to protect Quebecers' core values, and it points out secularism, it points out protection of the French language specifically, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes. So those are enshrined. Of course, they were already in statutes before that had somewhat of a quasi-constitutional. So the very, very important statutes were already adopted. So this is reinforced, and it's reinforced with the understanding that a constitution has normally a value above other laws in the order in which it's adopted. So here, the Quebec Constitution would become, although it partly is already, but it would clearly become supreme over other Quebec laws. Now, one thing that is clear, but not obviously stated by this document or by the government, is that the Quebec Constitution, although it's completely legal to have a constitution, we already had one, it just wasn't really explicit and codified, is always subject to the Canadian Constitution. So there are aspects of the Canadian Constitution that will continue to apply to Quebec.
So with respect to that, you have a Canadian Constitution. You mentioned before, about when we talk about secularism and the French language, which already have statutes in existence, some people question whether this is necessary at all or what it's set to achieve by virtue of the fact that those things are already accounted for.
I would say, and I've been a strong proponent of the adoption of a Quebec Constitution, because I think it's important for citizens to have a document that is clearly accessible, that outlines the laws that relate to how government works. So that's a positive aspect, to say now we know what the rules will, what the basic rules are concerning Parliament, concerning the executive, and so on. So that's clear. Having a clear list of what our rights and sometimes obligations are, that's a democratic process to have access to that document, and that's not unusual. All American states have their constitutions. All the Swiss cantons, which are the equivalent of Canadian provinces, have their own constitutions. So that's not unusual. And it can be quite a positive aspect. What it brings is, in a sense, clarity. Now, there's an issue about process. When you actually adopt a constitution, hopefully this is a bringing together exercise. Constitution basically means bringing our rules together, making our rules together. And this is where there's been some criticism about this process of having a document that has been drafted in a ministerial office with experts who are, very competent, but is almost presented as not quite a fait accompli, because there will be debates, but not as a very inclusive process of bringing the polity together, the whole of the Quebec society together in developing its own rules.
So I see that in this, that they say, I guess the government also says it hopes to reinforce what they call the province's autonomy. How does this do that?
Well, there are certain things that are affirmed, and for instance, the right to terminate a pregnancy has now been enshrined in the Quebec Constitution. So eventually, if there were challenges to abortion at the federal level, technically in Quebec, and it's a complicated issue, but there are issues, for instance, where Quebec is taking a stand, and that right for now is better protected under Quebec law than arguably it is under federal law. It's decriminalized, but it's not written as a right. So that's positive. Now, how it protects its autonomy, I mean, I haven't been able to really decipher the statute, the included new statute on autonomy, but basically it gives directions to the Quebec government. So it's like Parliament the Quebec Parliament giving directions to its own government, current and future, to say when you're handling relations with Canada, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to defend Quebec's jurisdictions as much as possible. You're going to try to limit federal intrusion in your areas of jurisdiction. That could be health, that could be housing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a direction. There's also a direction about trying to protect Quebec's territorial autonomy, basically its borders. I presume the idea is in the eventuality of independence that, it's asserting the borders, but I would need to dig more into knowing what it actually says in this respect.
I would ask one other part that's in this draft, which would bar publicly funded bodies from using public funds to challenge what the government calls foundational Quebec laws. And that, of course, brings up challenges to Bill 21, launched by, among other organizations, the English Montreal School Board. What does that do? Does that basically say these laws, as they will now stand in a constitution, can simply not be challenged at all?
Frankly, I cannot answer this question. I was surprised by that provision. I had not seen it before. I'd not anticipated this, so I need to understand the four corners. I think the objective is what you're saying. It's basically saying anybody can challenge a law, given proper procedures, but you cannot use public money. If you're a certain kind of institution, I would suspect they would be thinking about school boards and so on. If it's so, that is, I would say, for me,
okay,
problematic. But I wouldn't, again, it's hard to know exactly what is expected and how this would concretely unfold.
Okay, last thing I would ask you with respect to what happens next. So this is going to be discussed, it's going to be debated, but basically when push comes to shove, rather, the CAQ has a majority in the National Assembly. So after all the debate and after all the discussion, the sense is this will still become what it is now. This draft will become law or a bill.
Well, there's certainly a strong affirmation of parliamentary sovereignty and the very strong power of the National Assembly, and it's reinforced here several times in this text, and it's in the practice. There's a sense with the CAQ that the voice of the Quebec nation is the voice of the National Assembly and not the voice of a more inclusive way of bringing the society together. Civil society will be able to make comments, but only through the parliamentary process, unless this process is opened up. And I know that some people have called for this, to say we should not be using only the committee system at Parliament and so on to have actually public hearings across the province, and certainly much more robust negotiations with First Nations. I mean, there's a recognition of First Nations, of their existence, of their right to protect their language and their traditions, not their self-government. But to my knowledge, there's not been any negotiations with them either. But the road you're tracing is not an impossible road. I don't think it's a desirable road, but I think it's a possible road.
All right.
That it would take the parliamentary process and be voted in.
We will leave it at that. I thank you so much for your time and insight. Appreciate it.
With pleasure. Thank you.
The newest tracks. Let's go. New music. And the next big thing.
Always on the new music first.
Your first place to hear it all.
'Cause you gon' like it, love it, wanna play it twice. Playing now.
iHeart New Music. Your digital station for brand new drops, fresh finds, and tomorrow's bangers.
I think we need something new.
Discover iHeart New Music. Always fresh, always first. Stream now on the free iHeartRadio app.